All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm an on-time type of girl, so I know we don't have all of our participants. I think will probably be joining us since it is lunch, so people probably had to grab a bite to eat and then get their computer going. But we're kind of limited on time, so we are going to get this show on the road. So welcome to the Lunch with the Legal Eagles of the Illinois Council of Exceptional Children. My name is Jamie Hodge. I'm the Executive Director of Williamson County Education Services. That's in the pretty far extreme Southern Illinois, so much further south than Springfield, just in case you didn't know. I also have the great honor to serve as the president of the Illinois Alliance of Administrators of Special Education. And so that's why I'm here today moderating this. We've got a little over an hour to dive right in to submit an amazing question and answer session, hot topics in special education. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our Eagles, which has made me laugh about this. And so we'll just start right away. First up, we have Darcy Crea. Darcy, wave. Yep. Darcy's a partner with the law firm Crea Bocek. For Darcy, educational law is personal. She was the first person in her family to graduate from college, let alone law school. She's dedicated her career to representing boards of education and is widely known in the field for her personal touch, creative and collaborative resolutions, volunteer work, and her enormous heart. Darcy specializes in issues related to special education, student rights, and student responsibilities. But she also has extensive experience in general education law, board governance, collective bargaining, and employment. Darcy earned her Juris Doctorate from John Marshall Law School in 1992 and her bachelor's in psychology, magna cum laude, from Mundelein College in Chicago in 1989. She's admitted to practice before the U.S. Supreme Court, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, all federal district courts in Illinois, and is a member of the federal court trial bar. Darcy and her family reside in LaGrange, Illinois. So welcome, Darcy. Next up, our next Eagle is Neil Takeff. Neil's a partner with a law firm of Whitted Takeff. Prior to joining the firm, he was an attorney with the Lake County Public Defender's Office and with the Cook County Office of the Public Guardian. Mr. Takeff received his law degree from New York University School of Law and earned a bachelor's in political science and philosophy from Duke University. Before becoming an attorney, Mr. Takeff was an elementary education teacher for the Houston Independent School District and was involved with the Teach for America program for 3 years. He was also a school board member for the Community Consolidated School District 46 and currently serves on the board of directors for Turning Point Behavioral Health Center in Skokie, Illinois. He currently teaches graduate level education law courses at both Dominican University and Aurora University. Mr. Takeff is a frequent speaker in the area of special education law, school discipline, and mental health law. So welcome, Neil. And we will, kind of our style today is going to be a little bit round robin, but we also are going to have both attorneys kind of weigh in on both questions. We worked together to come up with some kind of good questions, and it became way too long that an hour is not going to do it. So we're going to have to just jump around, and I'll also try to go ahead and answer some questions in the chat. So if you do have specific questions and you want to put in the chat, I should be able to kind of throw them in too. So
it'll be messy but informative.
Messy but informative. Hey, it's special education, right? Isn't that what we do? So we will just get to flying right now. So our first topic is in evaluation. And so we'll start out with Darcy, and then Neil could jump in as well. So Darcy, what if a parent will not allow an evaluation to move forward due to COVID-19 concerns?
Yeah, very good question. Can you guys all hear me okay? I'll get real close. You can see every pore in my face. Isn't it beautiful? Yeah. And my bloodshot eyes. I don't know why that is. Anyone else have bloodshot eyes? Yeah. Oh, it's been a week. So yeah, no, this is a great question. And we, one of the things, like, to kind of, it's related, it's not exactly on point, but it's related, is that the State Board of Ed, in the guidance documents that they came out, the COVID documents, and there's a number of them, and Neil and I know Jamie, we've poured over them many times, but there's a number of references in there to, if a parent is uncomfortable attending an IEP meeting that is not in person, what ISB was saying, so just it's tangentially related, but we try to extrapolate, that's what we do. We try to figure out what the State Board of Ed says about things, and then we try to extrapolate that to like issues. So the question is about an evaluation, but if we back it up one, if you have a situation where when a school district has situations where the family either is not comfortable or is not technologically capable of participating in a Zoom IEP meeting or Google Meets or, this, or even on the telephone, some families are not comfortable. That's okay. What ISB said at the very beginning, the Illinois State Board of Ed said, honor the family's discomfort and simply, try to wait to hold the meeting until basically things resume to normal. So that resumption to normal is obviously, I think it's fair to say that at this point in the COVID timeline might still be a ways off, and again, not everywhere, right? The state is very complex right now. There's a lot of schools in, some in full-time, some in hybrid, many are fully remote. So you've got a whole combination of things. So if we extrapolate that advice, which again, kind of came out at the beginning, and so there's no real end to this in sight, we try to honor what I advise clients to do, and I represent school districts, right? So I advise them as best they can to honor the parents' wishes in that regard. So when it comes to an evaluation, of course, we're up against timelines, aren't we? So every triennial evaluations, reevals are due every 3 years, thus as the name implies. And what if a family doesn't give consent to a triennial? The one thing to bear in mind, and I have to remind clients sometimes, is that it does not mean that the student is no longer eligible. That's not how it works. So just because parent does not consent to a 3-year reeval for COVID reasons or otherwise, doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that the student somehow is dropped from eligibility. That's not how it goes. I would say most school districts are aware of this, but I would be lying if I said I don't still get that question. I do get that question on occasion. And so we dispel it, right? That's not how it works. So there's a couple different options. You can look at doing a records review or a file review instead of doing actual testing or assessment. And that is allowed 100% with parents' consent. So on the consent form for the reevaluations, it works for reevals, it's not initials, but parents can check the box. They agree that a record review can be done and that no evaluation is necessary. Now, there are situations sometimes where something has happened and the district wanting to do the testing, they think it's really important. And in those situations, you just try to work with the family best you can, and you document your attempts and you inform. That's another mistake I think sometimes districts make, is they just kind of do the work. So we talk a lot about work, of course, making sure that's right. So I would say and then we notate. So if the 3-year reevaluation is going to be late, I'm working with a lot of clients right now where that's happening. And yes, we potentially are going to get a little smack on the wrist from the State Board of Ed, but we just document our attempts and we document the parents' discomfort or we document the students' discomfort. And I think in COVID, these are very complex times and we don't want to get too pushy on such things. Really, if we've got a family that's really struggling with the comfort, we can deal with the ISB slap on the wrist is basically what I'm saying. So a district could file for due process over it, but again, that would only be to ask a hearing officer to allow school personnel to do the testing without the parent's consent. And, I don't know, in these times, I can say in the last 6 months, we have not gone down that path. Could we? Yes, it's an option, but at this juncture, it is not. I think times are tense enough that, we're trying to not, go down that path, basically. Neil, do you catching the same type of, would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to envision a hearing officer actually ordering parents who are uncomfortable due to health concerns of a pandemic to put their kid in a situation where they would be evaluated. So I would agree. I think using the due process mechanisms at this point would not be advisable.
I agree. Yep.
Okay. So Neil, let's kind of tag onto that a little bit and go back to initial evaluations. What happens when there's a lack of, RTI or MTSS data? How do we proceed with students who might be, suspect of SLD eligibility?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, when you look at the regulations, first of all, there's probably let's take a step back. The state has always, State Board of Education has always indicated that you can't use RTI as a justification for delaying a response to an evaluation. I mean, that has been their guidance when we first went to RTI, and it's incorporated into the regulation 226-130B. So you still can use a severe discrepancy to determine a learning disability. And that's also in the regulation. So I don't know that a lack of RTI would prohibit a school district from proceeding with an evaluation. You could certainly use curriculum-based measurements, other information, records review, like Darcy was saying, to justify moving forward with an evaluation.
Darcy,
agreed. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think another thing sort of Neil made me think of it. He said something that made this jump in my head. A kind of another tangential issue is that we've got I'm working with some school psychologists throughout the state that are really struggling. They philosophically, pedagogically do not believe that assessment should be done like remotely. Let's use that as an example. And again, I understand this, and it's very atypical, obviously. I mean, we've not encountered anything like this before, have we? But it is requiring, so I have to say to those clients, like, listen, your own personal comfort level on this, I respect, I value. But the thing of it is that can in and of itself stall an evaluation, whether it's an initial or a reeval, or whether it's like a little 2.5-year-old bug coming up in the system, like a little tot, they used to call them tots. You just can't, we can't just wait on this because of like the evaluator's comfort level. And so that has been like a crucial conversation. I'm not even going to say difficult, it has been, but it's a crucial conversation that you have to have. And while I understand it, and I understand that this new world we've entered is very complex on a number of different fronts, we've got to be adaptable. And I'm not saying I'm surprised, but I've noticed a little bit of pushback, mostly from my psychologist friends, not to say OTs, PTs. Again, it kind of does run the gamut. There's no, like, how do you evaluate for how do you conduct a physical therapy evaluation right now when, you can't be, or you're not with the students present in the same room. It is very complex and certainly not something that we've ever dealt with before. So,
yeah, and to build on that, I think we do have to challenge assumptions, and we do need to challenge maybe our preconceived notions of what you do in an evaluation, and get creative with collecting data, and get creative with doing things remotely. Or if a school is remote, is there ability to have a safe space to conduct an evaluation, right? Yeah. Your school district could be remote and providing the education, yeah, but you could adhere to COVID-19 protocols and conduct an in-person evaluation. So I think it is really important to kind of challenge some of those preconceived notions of what an evaluation is and how it should be done.
100%. And I think it'll be better going forward. I think we're going to learn some things and adapt. I mean, we're watching it happen right under our feet now, aren't we? That each of us has had to adapt in certain ways. And I totally agree. I think adaptation is the key. And, we're just going to keep moving the ball forward,
Great. Okay, so let's talk about those kind of remote plans for a minute, really in how it's, relationship to IEPs and the remote service plans or remote learning plans, whatever you want to call them. And so how do you feel, we'll go ahead and start with Neil here, the relationship between like a remote learning plan and IEP, and how does that, mix up with our lovely FAPE of the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $100,000 question, right? And let me start out, and I think, Darcy would agree, I don't know that we have all the answers on this yet. In fact, I know we don't have all the answers. And Probably 80 to 90% of what, all of the attorneys who are representing school districts and parents, we're probably on the same page for about 80 to 90%. And then there's some, nuances on this. So, we let's start with what we know. We know that an IEP, is our offer of FAPE, right? That's how we offer FAPE to students with disabilities. What is a remote service plan or remote learning plan? I would say that is the plan on how we're going to implement that offer in the pandemic, right? Is it sufficient for FAPE? Maybe, maybe not. It's going to depend on each kid, what can be provided. I think that what we are understanding to be what can be provided is much greater now than it was in the spring. I think we have kind of turned the corner on that. But we're going to have to look at things. We're going to have to look at how a student's responding and progressing on goals. Is the learning environment, the remote learning environment, even accessible for a student? We know there are some students who really struggle to, access a remote learning environment. And I think what's really going to come down to is I think when these cases, and there are going to be challenges to remote learning plans, and whether that's an offer of FAPE, is the deficiency a result of the pandemic? The deficiency in services, was there district discretion? And if there was, if the remote learning plan does fall short of what, a hearing officer determines FAPE, how are we going to assign responsibility for that, for not providing student needs? Is it going to be as simple as our, traditional or typical comp ed analysis? I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a really, really complex question. It's the one we're all struggling with. We know students aren't getting as much as we want them to get. We know that we have, administrators who are really struggling with this throughout the state, saying, I've only got, high school administrators, I only got this kid for 4 years. We know we need to do more. How do we do that in this context, in this environment? So, I really see the remote learning plan as not necessarily an offer of FAPE, but an offer of implementing the IEP in the pandemic.
No, I think that's really well put, Neil. I agree with everything you said. We've got a little running list in the office of cases that are being decided on the issue of, remote learning plans and how does FAPE weave itself in. And there's probably about 20, maybe just shy of 20 reported cases, I think, as of Wednesday of this week. Again, throughout the country, that stands to reason because IDEA, of course, is a federal law. And I would say that there's like a couple themes, and Neil's touched on them really, but critically, there has to be an individualized decision about how the students' needs are going to be addressed. That's critical. And we know this, don't we? One size fits all approach, or this is how we do it. That never works in special ed world. So making sure that the decisions are individualized. It's okay to factor in administrative issues, administrative concerns, but they cannot be in the driver's seat, right? Administrative issues, like, here's what I mean by that. Like, we've had, the numbers in Illinois are such right now that they're bad throughout the state. And what we're seeing is like speech pathology services have to stop in the district for a period of a month or so, because all the speech pathologists, the 2 speech pathologists in the district are out with COVID, or they're on FMLA leave caring for a family member who's ill. Not always with COVID, but this is what we're starting to see. Or the 2 speech paths, one of them has COVID herself. So what's starting to happen are little pockets like that, and that we think, unfortunately, is just going to continue. And there's not enough speech language pathologists in the whole wide world, right? I tell my 4 kids, you want to grow up and be something bilingual or a speech pathologist, and life is going to be super good for you. So you're always going to have job security. But there's shortages in a lot of different areas, aren't there? And so I think administratively, if I can explain to a hearing officer, God forbid, right, it comes to that my 2 speech or my 5 speech paths or my 2 OTs or whatever it is, or out on leave. And so we were unable for that period of time to deliver those services. I think that's an example where I think it's not an administrative need, it's like a health safety issue. Now, like Neil said, though, you have to like come up with a plan for address. You have to, second thing, communicating with families. It's just key. And so that's what the cases are really, I think, starting to parse out those two issues, like individualized decisions, not cookie cutter, and then communicating with your families. It just, even if it's not good things to communicate, you've just got to constantly be letting them know what's going on in the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have that running list of cases,
Yes.
in our office that we're updating.
Watching.
I represent, Darcy indicated she represents school districts. I represent school districts too. I also represent parents. So there's the full disclosure. I sit on both sides of the table. I don't know, and I don't know that you're inferring this, Darcy. I don't know that the fact that the speech pathologists both have COVID, for example, and are out, I think it explains why there was a deficit. I don't know that it would get a district out of potentially requiring compensatory education, right? So
I don't disagree. Yeah.
Because we had a shortage of speech pathologists before, and it's not the district's fault that there aren't enough speech pathologists, to go around. So we would have situations where we would contract with private speech path. So there's, there still may be a need to provide compensatory education. I think what we're seeing, though, to build on what you said, is that this documentation, communication, and really good faith, those are things that seem to play a role in how hearing officers and state investigators are resolving these cases, right? It's when you don't have the individualized approach, when you're really not acting in good faith, and you really can't explain why you didn't provide an accommodation that you reasonably could have provided in remote learning, that districts are having to then provide compensatory education.
Agreed. That's exactly right. And while comp ed is, I think of comp ed, compensatory ed, as like a relief that a hearing officer can order, or a court can order. It's like something that comes from on high, so to speak. I do like the fact, I guess, that in the field, with the clients I work with, and there's over 100 school districts in Illinois. So we represent a good chunk of them, very large, small, the whole shebang. I'm like, they're not all like this, but the general gist is that they wish that things were different, and they do speak the lingo of comp ed sometimes. In other words, I watched that shift. Like comp ed was sort of that, it was like a bad word and you didn't say it, and it was only something that was like done onto you. But now I think there is this really aching realization that, there is going to be a period of time at some point where we have to do kind of a reassessment and try to build some services back in. If we can't deliver them now, there's no reason to think that we couldn't try to get some in the future. And I think the thing that's, like we're tired, like, and there's just only so much that we, each of us, again, we're all recognizing this, that, like how much are we going to ask of these good people? But that's not, people want to make it right. And it kind of loops into, I don't think this is on our questions, Jamie, but like there was an article this week came out, I forget where, but about aging out at the day before your 22nd birthday, and like, what are we doing with all these souls that need this intensive transition services and support? And where are we doing that out in the community? I mean, that's like our law firm is a transition work site, which we're really proud about. We've served 5 transition kids until March 17th, and then it stopped. And it's actually, God, that's ridiculous that I'm breaking up about that. That is heartbreaking to me. It's heartbreaking to watch that we can't have transition students in the office now, helping with the various things that they help with. This is just like a little microcosm of what's happening in the larger community. So there's a lot of talk about, well, can we give them an additional year? Maybe can we in Illinois have them age out? Like there's talk about, like going through the school year in which they turn 22? Can we get them to like June of their 22nd birthday, you know? Or can we maybe serve them through age 22 and until the day before their 23rd birthday? That's almost, it's weird to say, we're so attuned to saying it the other way. But, you know, that, and so I know there's a lot of chatter in Illinois, and guess where else, at almost every other state, about what about that pocket of kiddos? And I think, unfortunately, again, not political, setting that completely aside, but like the fair tax not passing, that's going to result, you know, that's going to have like a ricochet or a continual effect on lots of things. And so I was kind of thinking that the transition age was going to be extended a little bit in Illinois to try to, you know, help serve the kiddos on the back end of their K-12 education. But I don't know, I'm not so sure anymore. That it's like a money issue sometimes. And whether that's right or wrong, it's just the reality of, I think we're going to be in for a couple difficult years on a financial, again, that has nothing to do with FAPE, right? Like I can't sit and say to parents, well, guess what? We don't have any money, so that's just tough for you. But I mean, I think we all just are going to have to recognize that the next couple of years, we're going to see a slow shift or an erosion of the funding in some of these different pockets. I can't say where yet, but, and I think that's something we're just going to have to deal with in the years to come, and it will be difficult.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other thing that with comp ed, and I think I hear this both from parents and from school administrators, they want to give comp ed to kids now.
Yes.
School administrators want to give it now and parents want it now. The problem is you need those kids back in school to identify. If you really want it, you can always give more services, right? But if you want to tie it to compensatory education and try to put a student back in the place that they would have been had they gotten those services, you need to know where they're at, and you need to have good, solid present levels. And you really can't start to do that until the kids are back in your buildings.
Yeah, agree.
So, I think that's the other challenge is everybody wants to talk comp ed right now, but I think it's premature.
Yeah, I agree. I don't disagree.
Yeah. So let's stay on comp ed for just a minute. And this is maybe also premature actually talking, but, you know, and many school districts that I've heard are experiencing this where they are in a hybrid model or a remote, you know, full remote model, and parents are kind of a la carting the IEP, you know, picking and choosing, meaning like, hey, we want to do our direct instruction, you know, remotely or maybe even hybrid in person, but we're not going to log on for speech, or we're not going to log on for counseling. And so then we're not providing that service because the parent is not making the child available, not participating, because that service, so to speak, is just not on a priority. And so then school districts are worried about how does that impact us when we're trying to provide it, but not able to provide it fully. Does that make sense? Yeah. Totally.
No, and that's a great question, Jamie. And I think it comes down really, and Neil, I'm sure will agree, it's just documentation. You know, we're a little bit in the Wild West here. It's very strange to think about. In fact, I abhor thinking about, I don't like it. The IEP is like not a menu, right? Like what those services are and what we're recommending. That's what the consensus of that sacred IEP team is. But absolutely, we've got a lot of situations right now where the struggle is real. You know, parents are saying, you know, it's hard. And they're like, okay, but like for right now, speech is too much. And we just, you know, we're going to put the pause on speech. And so I tell clients, you know, again, we're you know, you just you communicate and document, you know, that on such and such date, the family, you know, asked to discontinue speech services. And there's a variety of reasons that can happen. I think they try to problem solve first with the family about what are the barriers and how can we help, and what if we did it every other week instead of every week? You know what I mean? The bag of tricks and the bag of like, it's like the Mary Poppins bag, you know, like school personnel try to come up with different strategies, and y'all are brilliant with that. You know, they really are, and parents too. And when you've got that great relationship, magical things happen. But it's hard because it leaves a lot of unknowns, doesn't it? For like how long, and what happens if school goes back in session, then what? And, you know, I just see, I like worry sometimes that things are going to fall through the cracks. because it's not how any of us are accustomed to thinking about the IEP, is it? It's a strange feeling, but that is happening.
Or how we think of the delivery of services, right? We're used to, in the school setting, as school administrators and professionals, we're the ones who gather the data. We're the ones who work with the kids. And when we're in these remote settings, it's parents that are supporting their kids and providing, physical prompts or attentional prompts often. So, I don't know really where we know that parents have never been responsible for the provision of FAPE, right? Like that's pretty clear. But when a parent, opts, I think a very close question, Jamie, is what if the parent isn't as supportive as maybe the school thinks they should be during remote learning, right? And I think that is a difficult question to ask because it attaches a lot of judgment right away when we don't know what the circumstances are with the family. So I would say take a step back. And the first question is, why are the parents making the decisions that they are? Is there a work commitment? Do they not have the ability to support their students? Are they, or are the students, do they have another student that needs more support, right? So there's a lot of things that could be going on in a family. So parental participation may or may not play a role. I mean, when it comes to compensatory education, I mean, there are equitable considerations. And, if a parent refuses a service that would be considered reasonable, maybe that would have a role in it in identifying a comp ed award. But again, if the reason the parent made that decision is because they have a work commitment, I don't see it. So it's really going to be fact dependent on the individual circumstances that a family is going through during a pandemic.
So Neil, why don't you take this one too? What about our students who we already know that they need one-to-one support, to be able to access education, period. And that caregiver may or may not be able to provide that. But so what are our requirements there to provide staff at the home of those students or support for the parent to be able to do that when we already have established that we know that child needs that?
Well, so these are the most difficult kids to program for in remote learning. I would say that having a staff in the home is not required. I don't think anybody would require that to happen. I think districts could elect to do that. I think there has been some discussion nationwide from attorneys that represent school districts as to whether that might be something to consider in the future. Obviously, there are health concerns in doing that. Going back to some of that, case law that Darcy referenced that we're all looking at. I mean, there have been cases out there that have indicated one-to-one check-ins could be sufficient. Having breakout rooms, using parents, using siblings. I think one of the most underutilized aspect of an IEP has always been that parental training component that's built in there. And I think this is really the time that we need to focus on that and say, what is it that we can do as a district to support the family and provide training to the parent or to an adult sibling or to anyone who's in the house that could be supporting the student. And so I've had districts that we represent, agree even when things were really bad to go out in the parking lot, in a socially distanced manner and work with a family and teach a family how to use just, certain types of prompts, physical prompts, verbal prompts, and actually teach them how to work with their child. So, these kids are the kids that I'm most worried about. And I think they're the most challenging kids, but I think we can get creative and come up with some solutions.
I totally agree. I think parent training is critical. And I remind districts all the time that, it's like implementing a behavior plan. You know what? That's not for the faint of heart. It's even those of us that all understand what a behavior plan is and the need to be consistent. I don't know. Listen, when you're in the moment, so I think that's a lot of I'm watching really some blossoming work being done where the district, when they have a behavior specialist or, like a BCBA on staff, or they consult with one, little videos are popping up that are like parent training videos, or you can find them online. I mean, they're there. I mean, there's mask, for example, like face mask desensitization materials. And, we're trying to open source that as a firm because, it's being created, it's work being created by our school district friends, and some, really, like talented parents out in the field. Let's get it out there. Let's flood the field with the information so that we can, really, it's training parents on, like Neil said, like hand over hand, how to, teaching a child not to be prompt dependent. I mean, this is all heavy duty stuff. I mean, educators have years and years of training and experience, and they have each other to rely on in classroom settings. And, parents just, they don't have that. And even those of us that, know how to talk the talk, and I know what all those things are, it's a different thing, knowing it, like really understanding how to implement it in your own home with your own child. That's a completely different, that's a horse of a different color, and it's hard. And I think that that's the key. You just got to meet your families where they are and really support them, and help them grow. And it's been hard because parents can get upset and they're angry, and that's, and that's okay. I use the word grace repeatedly every day. I'm just like, you got to dig deeper, peeps. I know you're tired, but you've got to demonstrate some grace here. If you're getting berated or harassed, that's one thing. If families are crossing a line with you, we'll take care of that. But short of that, you got to really meet them with grace, and you've got to meet them where they are. And we just don't walk in their shoes. And I think that's, I just think now more than ever that's just a good philosophy to have. These are tough times.
And these may be the kids that we do the best we can, and we do need to provide compensatory education once we get back into schools, right? I mean,
exactly.
We know there are some kids who, just because of the natures of the barriers to education, that putting them in front of a screen is not going to be a successful way for them to learn.
Right. Okay, so speaking of which, what happens when, or what's the recommendation for schools whenever parents say, you know what, I'm just going to homeschool my kid because you people are too much for me. I can't, and I have to say that as a mom, I can't get it, I can't be there at 2:00 with him in front. My grandma's watching him today because I have to work, and we're just going to say, forget you guys for now, and we're going to homeschool our kid. And then the school district goes, no, don't do that. So, what is your advice for schools in that? Do we, automatically kind of throw out an ISP, in Illinois, or do we, sometimes there's a part of us that says, okay, well, see you later. Like, no problem. Call us later. So, Neil, you want to take that one for a minute and talk about those families and those, what would your advice be to school districts?
I don't know that it would be much different than the parent who wants to revoke special education eligibility. And that's really not a good idea, right? Like, you want to make sure that they really understand the consequences, try to engage them. I mean, look, there is a concept of dually enrolled. So even if they wanted to, provide some homeschooling, I would rather have some access to that student and be able to have some connection and provide some special education service. So, maybe raising the issue of being dually enrolled, and dually enrolled students, I mean, it then becomes up to the district to really translate that IEP for the amount of time that the family is willing to allow their student to be enrolled. And it gives districts quite a lot of discretion on how to provide services. So you can prioritize, what you think is the most beneficial for the student. So, I think, constant, trying to re-engage, and of course, I wouldn't default right away to dually enrolled, but I try to, walk through the barriers. Why do you not want to be, what's going on here? What can we do to help? What can we do to support? Is there parent training? Can we modify the schedule? Can we do things where you're still a student, of our school district? And if that's not working, then maybe look at a dually enrolled situation for the student.
Yep, I agree. I've been advising, because it's a tricky area, right, Jamie? And Neil would agree. It's so I've been writing more prior written notice letters than I care to even comment on, a lot of them. So we're doing a lot of prior written notice letters. Well, and we're having meetings, like Neil said, it prompts a conversation. Let's have an IEP meeting with the full team, over Zoom or on the phone, and let's talk about what the barriers are. And let's figure out, what if he just pops in for an hour in the morning, or you're problem solving together with the family. But then I think ultimately, if they make the decision to basically pause or take a year off or homeschool this year, it comes out in different lingo. It's an interesting thing. They're not revoking consent necessarily. That's not the words that are coming out of their mouths. It's not the lingo, but they're just like, it's just too much. We'll see you next year. And, or when this is all over, we'll check back in. So we're doing a prior written notice letter that's very strange. It's like a revocation one. Neil's exactly right. It's exactly that, except I guess the way I've kind of drafted it is to say, I just have a paragraph in there that says, like, under normal circumstances, we would treat this like a revocation of consent. Here's what that means. But under the circumstances, we get where you're coming from. Here's what is going to happen at your request at the present time. Here's what we want you to know. You can come back in anytime you want. And then I usually put a little squib in there about what we would do. Are we going to reevaluate you to come back in to special ed, right? Isn't that, once there's a revocation, what does it require? To come back in, you would have to reevaluate. It's like it's an initial evaluation then, to come back in. So, I talk with some of our larger school district clients, there's they've got dozens of these, and they're not looking forward to the prospect of having to reopen 12 or 20 or 30 IEP meetings or evaluations, initial evals, whenever this is over, like, in the fall or whenever this is over. So I think sometimes we're just saying we're going to treat it like a pause button. Your child remains eligible, but we're not going to deliver services at your request. If at any time you change your mind, here's who you contact. Here's your procedural safeguards. So, a lot of prior written notice, / with IEP meetings, like Neil said, / with communications with families about what are the impediments, what are the barriers. The ISP, Jamie, that's what you asked in the beginning. It's a good question because it is, homeschooled kids, they're on the individual service plan. But because the money for ISPs is allotted, like the money for 2021, so to speak, for ISP kiddos, individual service plan kiddos, is basically already allotted and spent. It's already got a home, So if you get a new homeschooler today or you get one on Monday, they don't necessarily get services they're not in the pool of candidates for 2021. Can you include them in your pool? 100% yes. Many districts do. But they actually don't kind of come into the financial bit of it until 21, 22. It's like a year, it's like a year off. Again, that's kind of pedantic almost. I talk to clients about it. I make sure they understand the difference, but schools it's not like they're looking to save a buck by keeping kids off of ISPs. It's almost neither here nor there. So from a monetary lens, So I would say a lot of prior written notice letters, and you'd be surprised how many of those requests. I'm surprised at the number of Jamie, exactly those conversations that are being had. I think it's an indicator that families are struggling, that this is a difficult period for sure. It's probably an understatement.
And there's a lot of ways to address that, and I think the intent is the same. The procedure, the paperwork might be a little different. I would just say, if you're going to, put the pause button on, and that's certainly one way to do it, you got to manage these families and make sure that they're in your queue to kind of reconnect with them
Come back
of next year. You can't lose sight of them. You have to kind of hold an IEP meeting, re-engage them, bring them back, at the start of the next school year, or even before the start of the next school year.
I totally agree.
Yeah, and I think the number of those kids, that list is greater than it's ever been.
I agree.
And so that's difficult, I think, for people to know what to do. And so, Darcy, we call those in our area stand ready letters.
Stand ready.
And so, stand ready letters are very much, being handed out quickly around here.
Yeah, that's I like that term.
Right. So now the next going to move to a different topic for a little while. One that I never thought we would be talking about in this type of setting, but personal protective equipment, PPE, which is fun to say. Let's talk about that for a little bit. So Neil, what about our kiddos who, and I think we've gotten better at this. In August, if I had to ask you this question, it would maybe had a little bit of a different, meaning, but our students who cannot, will not, do not wear a mask. And what if that student has a one-to-one support aid? And let's throw some face shields in there because that's just for fun,
Sure. Well, I mean, we, again, looking at the different guidance, I mean, ISB has said you cannot use the fact that a student is not able to wear a mask to kind of forbid that student from coming to school. So I think that's the starting point. What we've been advising, I mean, I think it's really important to understand why they can't wear a mask, right? And so we've created forms for schools when they get this kind of request so that the doctor can very clearly mark out, this is a health issue, this is a sensory issue. I mean, we need to kind of get to the bottom of why they can't wear a mask, because that's going to kind of drive what we're going to do in response, right? So Darcy referred to the different protocols for students who can't wear masks for sensory issues, and trying to desensitize those students to wearing masks and building up their ability to wear masks. That could look like having a student in the school in the beginning for short, less than a full school day, right? And build them up as they build up their mask tolerance. The other things to, maintaining social distancing, additional PPE, face shields, discuss with parents the different options and make sure that they understand what the school is going to look like for their student, right? Like I said, they're going to be, if the student can't wear a mask, these are the things that we need to do. What we've found is that, when parents understand what that looks like, some of them are actually opting for remote learning. And so it no longer becomes an issue. I do believe that there still are districts that are requiring masks in order for a student to attend. Maybe that's the dirty little secret in Illinois, but that certainly I think is still going on. Maybe it should say they're requiring remote learning if a student can't wear a mask, but the state board has come out and said that you can't do that.
Yep, totally agree. This issue, I think, has become it was political. Therefore, certainly we all saw that in our lives, and that it was mask wearing. By the way, I've sewn my little fingers to the bone. I'm at 3,500 masks. Olivia and I, my 17-year-old and I, we've made 3,500 masks out of just fabric that's in the basement, and we don't need to talk to my husband about all that fabric. So it's being put to a good use. Let's just put it that way. And we're just donating them around, this and there. But yeah, it started as a real politicized issue. And so I read I had to respond to dozens and dozens and dozens of, parents who were angry and said, I'm not going to wear a mask. You're not going to make me wear a mask. My son's not going to wear a mask. You can all just go fly a kite. And the language was not usually that pleasant. You know what I mean? They weren't talking about kites, but that's basically what the letter would say. Or they'd present doctor's notes that said, oh, the child has an anxiety disorder, so they can't wear a mask. Well, that's all special and everything. But, so it's like anything. We do not want those examples to defeat us or make us harden our hearts to the fact that, that there are a huge number of students that really do struggle wearing masks, and it's entirely legitimate. And so I've had to spend, again, some time with clients just trying to separate those two things out. And I've got every letter that I've sent that says, thanks, but no, your son's going to have to wear a mask. We appreciate that you've got political issue with it. And we honor that, but it's a public school. So here in this public, we're going to do mask breaks though. So here's some fun stuff we're going to do. And then our friends like Schaumburg Elementary School District 54, I'll give them credit. Wonderful client, largest elementary district in the state. They've got about 14,000 kiddos. They developed mask desensitization resources. And if anyone's interested, I've got a little zip drive of the forms behavior, like positive behavior charts and sticker charts and stuff, color your own mask, So basically, I've watched as over time, basically it's become an issue where schools are going to teach kids, if to the extent they can, right? And it's certainly not going to work for all kids, and I'm the first to recognize that. But schools are going to teach kids, they're going to teach families how if they can tolerate it, to start on a desensitization program. Because why? Because educators teach for life, and they even though we think about it as teaching about math and science and reading and OT and PT and all these things, they're really teaching. It's like having to wear your pants in public. It's like you to go outside, no shirt, no shoes, no service. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you got to wear a shirt. And whether we like it or not, and whether I even want to admit it, I guess we've come there with masks for families to be able to go to the store or out to dinner together or to the movies when that part of our lives resume. We're probably going to be wearing masks for a little while. I don't know how long, God knows, I don't know. But so basically we're trying to partner with families and come at it that way. Like in order to enjoy life again, when that opens up for us, it is likely that we're all going to have to be wearing a mask for a while. Again, not a political statement, just the way that probably the cookie's going to crumble, So I think the schools that have sort of attacked it that way are seeing better success and better, whether parents agree or disagree, there's sort of I'm sensing a general recognition that that's just the way that it's going to be. And with the numbers that we're seeing, we've been over, I think Illinois passed 10,000 deaths yesterday. I mean, it's just the numbers are such that I think the message, we're on message, I guess is what it is. And then, if a kiddo can't wear a mask, we cannot keep them out of school. That's a big no-no. We have to look to our teaching staff who really, we're looking at younger teachers. We're assigning teachers to those classes that are not immunocompromised. We're just making teacher assignments. And again, the union's got a lot to say about that, as you can well imagine, but this is our new world order, and under no circumstance can a child be kept out if they cannot wear a mask. If they can't wear a mask, we try a face shield. And again, we're doing it. We keep the windows open in the building or in the classroom, and we do a lot of social distancing stuff. And again, we're learning that together. But I would say that I feel like there's been a shift and more mask compliance lately, and I think that's for the best.
Yeah, and just to clarify, ISB, when I said ISB is saying you can't you can't deny kids who can't wear masks. They're certainly not saying you can't deny kids who won't wear masks, right?
Correct.
I was not, and I'm not suggesting that. And we've also had to deal with, parents who are picking up kids and refuse to comply with the rules on masks. And you should, districts should be very comfortable that, when you're on district property, the rules are the rules. And if parents don't comply, that they can be banned from district property, just like we were able to do that if they, they didn't follow rules or were aggressive to staff in the past. I mean, it's the same, we're in a public health pandemic, and, parents have to comply with wearing a mask while on school grounds.
Yeah, and the real sad thing is, like, now not only are we coming to the point where each of us is going to know someone, or we're going to know someone with COVID. I'm at the point now, I think I know personally 4 people who have died of COVID, and these are educators that there's a superintendent right now in Illinois that is on life support. I mean, this is it's changing in a way that now our lives are directly impacted. And whether, God forbid, it's our family or our neighbor's family, and the numbers are just such that no matter where we live in this beautiful state of ours, we are going to know more people that not only have it or contracted it, but that have died from it or are suffering, the ill effects of it. And again, that sort of sharpens everyone's senses, doesn't it? And I think that's part of the reason why those questions about the masks are starting, they're starting to abate a little bit. And I think that might be part of it too. Unfortunately, just terrible truth of it.
Right. Okay, so let's move on to our COVID positive, quarantine, leaves, all of those things. So we've kind of been building up to it. And so now, Neil, what type of public notice do you think is necessary either to public or to staff when there's a positive case identified in the school? Do you post it on social media? Are you required to do that when there is a positive case in the school, whether it's a staff or a student?
Well, I think let's take a step back. Not only what kind of notice, but what can be in the notice or should be in the notice, right? So, you should not be disclosing. I do think it is appropriate and imperative to let your community know if there has been, a positive case identified in the school. I think it's incumbent on all of us to protect personally identifiable information. You shouldn't be naming names of students or staff. As far as that notice, how you communicate that information. I mean, most of the schools have ways to communicate with their community. My son's school sends emails, right? We get emails. I think that's very appropriate. I would not use social media. I would not use Facebook. I mean, that's just me. It doesn't have the right feel to it, but you do want to get the information out.
Yep, totally agree. And this has been a hot topic, dashboards. And it is, I say it like this, it's like one big, horrible, nightmarish snow day. It's like, I don't know how else to explain it, but it's like when there's a big snow, I usually wake up. It's like 3 a.m. and my little beady eyes pop open and I've got superintendents buzzing my phone on text, just like trying to figure out whether to call the snow day, because it's important to figure out what your neighbor's doing or your sender district or your high school districts, like what's everybody doing? And, you kind of want to it's like little baby ducks. They all want to follow in a row, and if you're an outlier, whether you close school or open school because of a snow day, you're at the mercy of the public and batten down the hatches. So basically that's what's happening. Some districts have a dashboard where it shows every building, whether it's a staff or a student. Like Neil said, you're not saying names, but in some districts, when it's a teacher over at Lincoln Elementary School, there's only like 12 teachers there. You know what I mean? So sometimes it depends on the size of your district. And of course, in a small community like that, large communities too, everyone knows pretty quickly, so who it is. But so, like if you have a dashboard and you're showing by building and student versus staff, and then the neighbors they don't have a dashboard, they will get eaten alive, So it's been interesting and sad somewhat to watch, but this is how we learn and grow. We're adapting to what the expectations are for our individual communities to try to figure out what's going on. And I think that it keys into a struggle I've had with boards lately. Boards want to stay open and they say, but there's no spread in the schools. I don't know how do we know that? Like, again, I'm no expert, but it's like a little ping pong. It's like a pinball machine. It's like the student goes to school, they come home, they're with grandma, they go to a park on Saturday. It's just like this little ping pong or pinball ball that runs around, and I don't know. So I think that's been an interesting. ProPublica did an article like a week ago about really taking districts to task, like why aren't you publishing this data, and why is so I think the Illinois Department of Public Health is going to, they are publishing youth data. So like under 18-year-olds, how many have it and how many have died, and they're tracking that data. But the IDPH indicated, at least to ProPublica, that they were going to start tracking data per school district, which again, I think the more information we have, the better. I think that's fine. But the fact of the matter is, whether who knows whether it's being transmitted at school or at home or at church or in the park or at work. I'm sitting at work. Who knows? It's a horrible, horrible virus that way. It's horrible that way. And anyway, that's my little, not to get on a soapbox, but there's been a lot of debate and talk about that in the field, which has been interesting.
Okay, so let's move on to kind of the quarantine world, which, can last anywhere from 2 days to 24 days to, everything in between. And so what do we all have the IDPH guidance, which changes regularly. You just got to pay attention to the red, the red font. But let's talk about, can a school district have more stringent standards than what's offered by IDPH? What happens when a parent thinks this is all just bogus? Go fly a kite. I'm not picking up my kid. He's got a runny nose. Yep. Guess what? It's allergy season. And so what do we do with that? Who quarantines students or staff? And let's talk about that for a little bit. You want to pick that up, Neil?
Sure. So, I think that there are some circumstances and situations where more stringent policies are appropriate. I think they have to be equitable across the board. I think they have to be fair, but there are public and private therapeutic day schools that the primary population is a population that can't wear masks or aren't able to wear masks for large parts of their day. And so I know some of these schools have worked with epidemiologists and have, that has led to social distancing of a greater number of feet than what you would commonly see recommended by the Illinois Department of Public Health. There are sometimes additional requirements to come back to school that are more, protective of the students, given the population that they work with. Some of them are medically fragile. So, as long as it's equitable, fair, and doesn't unnecessarily preclude a student from, coming to school, I think more stringent policies in certain circumstances are appropriate. I don't know what you think about that, Darcy.
I agree. I think it depends. Like if you've got a classroom with a kiddo with Down syndrome, like it's otherwise, that's one example of many. The studies that are coming out again, I try to stay. I'm no expert on it, but I try to stay abreast of that. There certainly looks like kiddos with Down syndrome and other cystic fibrosis is, I suppose, another one that's sort of a given, but otherwise, some sort of like immunocompromised state, whether it's a staff member or a student. But when it's a student, let's start with talking about that. Absolutely, I think more stringent standards can be put into place to help ensure that child safety. With staff members, it's a little different. I think I have to be a little more resourceful and adaptive about assignments. And, it's certainly, I've spent a lot of time working with unions, mostly very positively, sometimes not, but, trying to work with unions on alternate assignments where if where you are generally putting, how about this, a teacher who was COVID positive a couple weeks ago and is now going to be immune for all intents and purposes, IDPH says for 3 months. So if we've got, and this is happening, most districts have a teacher who was COVID positive and now will be immune for 3-month period. That CDC might change that to 6 months. There's some talk about that, but right now it's 3. At least that's how Illinois is looking at it. And that teacher can presumably be in a classroom with kids who maybe are not wearing masks or cannot socially distance, which is, again, that happens. And, we can make that assignment. And then that's one way that we can help ensure the safety and the health of the classroom and the teacher. So we're coming up again with the passage of time, some more novel ways. And it's really the school nurse, Jamie, to go back to your questions. Now, not all districts have a school nurse. I mean, that is for sure. But it's typically the nurse or someone of that ilk that is doing the temperature checks maybe and the quarantines, and they've kind of got like a staging area for folks that have developed a fever during the day, or kiddos that develop a fever, say, during the day or are ill. There's sort of a staging area. And then the FAQ that came out, I don't know, not the last change this week, but I think it was last week. It talked about the nurse or whoever's serving in that role does not automatically need to be quarantined after he or she is exposed to a COVID positive student or has close contact with a COVID positive student or staff member, because they didn't use the word essential worker, but if they're wearing a mask and they're socially distancing best they can, and they've got like other protective equipment on, like a gown and, this sort of thing, maybe gloves, then they can come back to work the next day, again, taking precautions, monitoring their health, etc. So again, this is, I am in awe of, the work that's being done there by nurses primarily. I think that, it's really something to behold. And I think in districts that don't have nurses, certainly that's a struggle right now because it's such a critical role.
Yeah, and I think that, if a family or a parent, is talking, I've got this my kid has a pre-existing condition, allergies, right? Like, this is bogus, first of all, it's not crystal clear whether the nurse even has the authority to say, okay, I'm going to take the data that we have on this student. And I know that every, March, this student has allergies and we're going to see red eyes and runny nose. It's not even clear to me from the guidance that nurse would qualify as a quote healthcare provider under the guidance. But putting that aside, I would err on the side of caution. I mean, why would a district take that risk? I think that if a student or a staff has COVID-like symptoms, they should be diagnostically tested and they should be sent home. And I don't want to say, absolutes, but, I think in the majority of cases, I would want the nurse to make that call and say, we need to get a healthcare provider to provide that alternative diagnosis.
I agree.
Yeah. So let's bring it back for kind of our teacher friends and, school people here about when that does happen. And let's say the whole class, because they can't social distance in some classes and we know it. And so the whole classroom, including staff and students, may be quarantined for 14 days. And so how does that work as far as compensatory education and services and remote versus, if you were in an in-person to begin with?
Yeah, I think there needs to be some fluidity. The districts that are making it work are the ones that can pivot or put the kids immediately onto the remote learning platform. And that is largely happening. I would say some districts are still struggling with that. But I think the more that we've learned over time is that there's a lot of stops of the train where you get on and off. And that's okay. So we basically have to build our system, our remote learning platform, in a way that allows kids to get on and off. Now, I think it's fine to select for the whole semester or the whole quarter. Many districts have done that. Make your selection. You got a one-time shot. However, the ISB guidance has been very clear that even if you choose as a parent hybrid learning or in-person learning, but your child is sick and has to quarantine or has COVID, they have to isolate. If they are close contact or have exposure, they have to quarantine. So basically, that child should be allowed an easy stop back onto the train through the remote learning process so that they're not left flapping in the breeze without services for 10 or 14 days, as the case may be, or 24 days. Sometimes they have to quarantine for 14 days, and then their positive COVID test comes in, and then they have to isolate for an additional 10. So that's why sometimes that number can creep up to 24. You can provide them with non-synchronous, like learning. You can provide them with packets, kind of like you would in a homebound situation, I suppose. And some districts are doing that. But I think the easier way to do is let them get onto the remote learning platform and off kind of with more ease.
I completely agree. And I think the districts, like you said, that have that flexibility, those are the districts when it comes to compensatory, education issues down the road, are going to be in a much better place than districts that are in the position where they have to give packets or they have to give asynchronous instruction. So I couldn't agree more. And I would certainly encourage, if you're not already at the point where you are able to have that fluidity, that you need to start moving there, because like Darcy said, we don't know how long this is going to last. And, we don't have the answers. So you got to be prepared.
Agreed.
Okay, great, thanks. So Darcy, do you think that it's appropriate in the situation where you may shut down a classroom, let's say, and provide the remote learning because all the staff are sick or all the staff are quarantined? And so, and that may be even community-based or spread, we could call it, but there's nobody there to teach the kids, especially in small districts, or there's no more bus drivers because, they're all sick. And so is it appropriate to switch to a remote learning plan temporarily in that situation?
Yes, it was most districts had, thankfully, I think most school personnel by the fall, they had a better sense. I think in March and April, we were all lost. I don't think any of us, I'll speak for myself. I thought for the most part, we'd be back in school in the fall, and I was just sort of, skipping around. I think though by the fall, there was a much better sense of how this was going to be fluid. And I think the communications are real important. The outbreak data, by the way, the definition of an outbreak changed last week or this week, I think. I think it was this week. An outbreak in a classroom used to be 2 or more positive cases in one classroom or one setting or on the bus, like one location, right? Well, 2 days ago, that number changed from 2 to 5. That is very telling. So despite the fact that the numbers in Illinois, of course, are increasing precipitously, as they are many other places, the Illinois Department of Ed and ISB has said now an outbreak is 5 or more students or students and staff combination in one classroom. This is fascinating. And basically it's a nod to the fact that maybe 2 was too low of a number. Maybe 2 defining it, because with an outbreak, you have to shut that class down. Like that basically what that means, right? But 5 seems a titch high, because to keep socially distanced classes, you usually have 10 to 15 kiddos in a classroom, right? Just to keep 6 feet between them. And that just, again, that's I don't have data. I mean, that's like my observation of it, but you can't hey, Mr. Takeif, your son's class has 5 kids, half of your son's class is COVID positive, but he can totally come to school tomorrow, like half the class. I don't know about that seems, or even a third of the class, that seems kind of high. But the IDPH did that on purpose this week. They did, Jamie, because again, I think they're trying to keep kids in school, which again, amen to that. But I'm a little perplexed as to why that number would jump up so quickly. But yes, and if you've got staff members, it happens in small districts that have 30 or 40 teachers. And if 10 of them are eating lunch together with their masks off for more than 15 minutes, and one of them gets it, and 10 of them have to quarantine, you have to shut school down. You can't function. So it doesn't mean that the kids don't get nothing. It just means that the school has to be a little more adept at trying to figure out how to, they might do asynchronous learning for a couple of days until they get their, together. And then they basically can pump the kids full of some education once the dust settles on it. But yeah, those questions are coming in daily now. They don't happen weekly. Those questions are coming in daily.
Neil, you got anything to add to that?
I really don't. I think Darcy, you covered it.
Okay. Well, we are right about at time here, according to my timer. And so I've been kind of monitoring the chat, and really we haven't, lots of good compliments. So to our speakers today, our Eagles have done a great job, but not many questions. We've kind of covered them as it went through. So that's exciting that we kind of, made it through all these topics I think that are hot and on everybody's mind. And so thank you everyone for attending. And, our Eagles did an amazing job. So Darcy, I couldn't find my Eagles, shirt. I was looking.
Yeah, where's your shirt?
No, I looked everywhere for it.
Dang, girl. I know. Well, you were a great moderator too. And
thanks, Jamie.
Yeah.
Here's hoping we can come back in a year and not talk about COVID-19.
Amen. Have us come in person. Neil and I can be on a panel, and hopefully we can all be together, and that would be lovely.
Yes, and I'm going to insert here, if you guys can hear me. I do want to thank you, and I apologize. Somehow I didn't get in at the beginning, but now I'm here. So seriously, thank you, Neil and Darcy both. And thanks for the memories too, because it's always great to see you guys. And it makes me think back like how far we've come and the challenges. And Jamie, awesome job. Thank you. Seriously, you guys, we can't do it without you. You're a big part of our team and we love you. I mean,
We love
that
you
sounds
too.
mushy, especially coming from me, but yeah, no, sometimes you just gotta reach out, especially during times when we need support. So thanks you guys and have a great day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay healthy.
Yes, yes.
All right, bye.
Bye.